my face. After an hour or so, Mr. Rucastle suddenly remarked that it was time to commence the duties of the day, and that I might change my dress and go to little Edward in the nursery. 2 days later the same performance was gone through under exactly similar circumstances. Again I changed my dress, again I sat in the window, and again I laughed very heartily at the funny stories which my employer has an immense repertoire, which he has told imitably. Then he handed me a yellow-backed novel, and moving my chair a little sideways, that my own shadow might not fall upon the page, he begged me to read aloud into him. I read for 10 minutes, beginning in the heart of a chapter, and then suddenly, in the middle of a sentence, he ordered me to cease and to change my dress. You can easily imagine, Mr. Holmes, how curious I became as to what the meaning of this extraordinary performance could be. They were always very careful, I observed, to turn my face away from the window, so that I became consumed with a desire to see what was going on behind my back. At first it seemed to be impossible, but I soon devised a means. My hand mirror had broken, so a happy thought seized me, and I concealed a piece of the glass in my handkerchief. On the next occasion, in the midst of my laughter, I put my handkerchief up to my eyes, and I was able, with a little management, to see all that was behind me. I confess that I was disappointed. There was nothing. At least that was my first impression. At the second glance, however, I perceived there was a man standing in the Southampton Road, a small bearded man in a grey suit, who seemed to be looking in my direction. The road is an important highway, and there are usually people there. This man, however, was leaning up against the railings, which bordered our field, and was looking earnestly up. I lowered my handkerchief, and glanced at Mrs. Rucastle, to find her eyes fixed upon me with a most searching gaze. She said nothing, but I am convinced she had divined that I had a mirror in my hand, and had seen what was behind me. She rose at once. "Jeffro," said she, "there is an impertinent fellow about the road there who stares up at Miss Hunter." "No friend of yours, Miss Hunter?" he asked. "No, I know no one in these parts." "Dear me, how very impertinent. Kindly turn round and motion him to go away." "Surely it would be better to take no notice." No, 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 we should have him loitering here for always. Kindly turn round and wave him away, like that." I did as I was told, and at the same instant Mrs. Rucastle drew down the blind. That was a week ago, and from that time I have not sat again at the window, nor have I worn the blue dress, nor seen the man on the road. "Pray continue," said Holmes. "Your narrative promises to be a most interesting one." "You will find it rather disconnected, I fear, and there may prove to be a little relation between the different incidents of which I speak. On the very first day that I was at the Copper Beeches, Mr. Rucastle took me into a small outhouse which stands near the kitchen door. As we approached it, I heard the sharp rattling of a chain, and the sound as of a large animal moving about. "Look in here," said Mr. Rucastle, showing me a slit between two planks. "Is he not a beauty?" I looked through and was conscious of two glowing eyes, and of a vague figure huddled up in the darkness. "Don't be frightened," said my employer, laughing at the start which I had given. "It's only Carlo, my mastiff. I call him mine, but really old Toller, my groom, is the only man who can do anything with him. We feed him once a day, and not too much then, so that he is always as keen as mustard. Toller lets him loose every night, and God help the trespasser whom he lays his fangs upon. For goodness' sakes, don't you ever on any pretext set your foot over the threshold at night, for it is as much as your life is worth." The warning was no idle one, for 2 nights later I happened to look out of my bedroom window about 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a beautiful moonlit night, and the lawn in the front of the house was silvered over and almost as bright as day. I was standing, wrapped in the peaceful beauty of the scene, and I was aware that something was moving under the shadow of the Copper Beeches. As it emerged in the moonshine, I saw what it was. It was a giant dog, as large as a calf, tawny tinted, with hanging jaw, black muzzle, and huge projecting bones. It walked slowly across the lawn, and vanished into the shadow upon the other side. That dreadful sentinel sent a chill to my heart, which I do not think that any burglar could have done. And now I have a very strange experience to tell you. I had, as you know, cut off my hair in London, and I had placed it in a great coil at the bottom of my trunk. One evening, after the child was in bed, I began to amuse myself by examining the furniture of my room, and by rearranging my own little things. There was an old chest of drawers in the room, the two upper ones empty and open, the lower one locked. I had filled the first two of my linen, and I had as much still to pack away. I was naturally annoyed at not having the use of the third drawer. It struck me that it might have been fastened by mere oversight, so I took out my bunch of keys and tried to open it. The very first key fitted to perfection, and I drew the drawer open. There was only one thing in it, but I am sure that you would never guess what it was. It was my coil of hair. I took it up and examined it. It was of the same peculiar tint, the same thickness, but then the impossibility of the thing obtruded itself upon me. How could my hair have been locked in the drawer? With trembling hands I undid my trunk, turned out the contents, and drew out from the bottom my own hair. I laid the two tresses together, and I assure you that they were identical. Was it not extraordinary? Puzzle as I would, I could make nothing at all of what it meant. I mentioned the strange hair to the drawer, and I said nothing of the matter to the Rucastles, as I felt that I had put myself in the wrong by opening a drawer which they had locked. I am naturally observant, as you may have remarked, Mr. Holmes, and I soon had a pretty good plan of the whole house in my head. There was one wing, however, which appeared not to be inhabited at all. A door which led into the quarters of the Tollers opened into this suite, but it was invariably locked. One day, however, as I ascended the stair, I met Mr. Rucastle coming out through this door, his keys in his hand, and a look on his face which made him a very different person to the round, jovial man to whom I was accustomed. His cheeks were red, his brow was all crinkled with anger, and the veins stood out at his temples with passion. He locked the door and hurried past me without a word or a look. This aroused my curiosity, so I went out for a walk in the grounds of my charge. I strolled around to the side from which I could see the windows of this part of the house. There were 4 of them in a row, 3 of which were simply dirty, while the 4th was shuttered up. They were evidently all deserted. As I strode up and down, glancing at them occasionally, Mr. Rucastle came out to me, looking as merry and as jovial as ever. "Ah," said he, "you must not think me rude if I passed you without a word, my dear young lady. I was preoccupied with business matters." I assured him that I was not offended. "By the way," said I, "you seem to have quite a suite of spare rooms up there, and one of them has the shutters up." He looked surprised, and as it seemed to me, a little startled at my remark. "Photography is one of my hobbies," said he. "I have made my dark room up there. But dear me, what an observant young lady we have come upon. Who would have believed it? Who would ever have believed it?" He spoke in a jesting tone, but there was no jest in his eyes as he looked at me. I read suspicion there, and annoyance, but no jest. Well, Mr. Holmes, from the moment that I understood that there was something else about that suite of rooms which I was not to know, I was all on fire to go over them. It was not mere curiosity, though I've had my share of that. It was more of a feeling of duty, a feeling that some good may come out from my penetrating into this place. They talk of women's instinct. Perhaps it was women's instinct which gave me that feeling. At any rate, it was there, and I was keenly on the lookout for any chance to pass the forbidden door. It was only yesterday that the chance had came. I may tell you that besides Mr. Rucastle, both Toller and his wife find something to do in those deserted rooms, and I once saw him carrying a large black linen bag with him through the door. Recently he had been drinking hard, and yesterday evening he was very drunk, but when I came upstairs there was the key in the door. I have no doubt at all that he had left it there. Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle were both downstairs, and the child was with them, so that I had an admirable opportunity. I turned the key gently in the lock, opened the door, and slipped through. There was a little passage in front of me, unpapered and uncarpeted, which had turned at a right angle at the farther end. Round this corner were 3 doors in a line, the first and third of which were open. They each led me into an empty room, dusty and cheerless, with 2 windows in one and one in the other, so thick with dirt that the evening light glimmered dimly through them. The centre door was closed, and across the outside of it had been fastened one of the broad bars of an iron bed, padlocked at one end to a ring in the wall, and fastened at the other end with stout cord. The door itself was locked as well, and the key was not there. This barricaded door corresponded clearly with the shuttered window outside, and yet I could see by the glimmer from beneath it that the room was not in darkness. Evidently there was a skylight which let in light from above. As I stood in the passage, gazing at the sinister door and wondering what secret it might veil, I suddenly heard the sound of steps within the room, and saw a shadow pass backward and forward against the little slit of dim light which shone out from under the door. A mad, unreasoning terror rose up in me at the sight, Mr. Holmes. My overstrung nerves failed me suddenly, and I turned and ran as though some dreadful hand were behind me, clutching at the skirt of my dress. I rushed down the passage, through the door, and straight into the arms of Mr. Rucastle, who was waiting outside. "So," said he, smiling, "it was you, then? I thought that it must be when I saw the door open." "Oh, I'm so frightened," I panted. "My dear young lady, my dear young lady." You cannot think how caressing and soothing his manner was. "And what has frightened you, my dear young lady?" But his voice was just a little too coaxing. He overdid it. I was keenly on my guard against him. "I was foolish enough to go into the empty wing," I answered. "But it is so lonely and eerie in this dim light that I was frightened and ran out again. Oh, it is dreadful. He's still in there." "Only that?" said he, looking at me keenly. What do you think?" I asked. "Why do you think I locked this door?" "I am sure that I do not know." "It is to keep people out who have no business there. You see?" He was still smiling in the most amiable manner. "I'm sure if I know—" "Well, then you know now. And if you ever put your foot over that threshold again—" Here, in instant, the smile hardened into a grip of rage, and he glared down at me with the face of a demon. "I'll throw you to the mastiff." I was so terrified that I do not know what I did. I suppose that I must have rushed past him into my room. I remember nothing until I found myself lying on my bed, trembling all over. Then I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. I could not live there any longer without some advice. I was frightened of the house, of the man, of the woman, of the servants, of even the child. They were all horrible to me. If I could only bring you down, all would be well. Of course, I might have fled from the house, but my curiosity was almost as strong as my fears. My mind was soon made up. I would send you a wire. I put on my hat and cloak, went down to the office, which is about 1/2 mile from the house, then returned, feeling very much easier. A horrible doubt came into my mind as I approached the door, lest the dog might be loose, but I remembered that Toller had drunk himself into a state of insensibility that evening, and I knew that he was the only one in the household who had any influence with the savage creature, or who would venture to set him free. I slipped in safety, and lay awake half the night, in my joy at the thought of seeing you. I had no difficulty in getting leave to come to Winchester this morning, but I must be back before 3 o'clock, for Mr. and Mrs. Rucastle are going on a visit, and will be away all the evening, so that I must look after the child. Now I have told you all my adventures, Mr. Holmes, and I should be very glad if you could tell me what it all means, and above all, what I should do." Holmes and I had listened spellbound to this extraordinary story. My friend rose now, and paced up and down the room, his hands in his pockets, and an expression of the most profound gravity upon his face. "Is Toller still drunk?" he asked. "Yes, I heard his wife tell Mrs. Rucastle that she could do nothing with him." "That is well. And the Rucastles go out tonight?" "Yes." "Is there a cellar with a strong, good lock?" "With a good, strong lock?" "Yes, the wine cellar." "You seem to have acted all through this matter like a very brave and sensible girl, Miss Hunter. Do you think that you could perform one more feat? I should not ask it of you, if I did not think you quite an exceptional woman." "I will try. What is it?" "We shall be at the Copper Beeches by 7 o'clock, my friend and I. The Rucastles will be gone by that time, and Toller will, we hope, be incapable. There only remains Mrs. Toller, who might give the alarm. If you could send her into the cellar on some errand, and then turn the key upon her, you would facilitate matters immensely." "I will do it." "Excellent. We shall then look thoroughly into the affair. Of course, there is only one feasible explanation. You have been brought there to impersonate someone, and the real person is imprisoned in the chamber. That is obvious. As to who this prisoner is, I have no doubt that it is the daughter, Miss Alice Rucastle, if I remember right, who was said to have gone to America. You were chosen, doubtless, as resembling her in height, figure, and the colour of your hair. Hers had been cut off, very possibly, in some illness which she had passed, and so, of course, yours had to be sacrificed also. By a curious chance, you came upon her tresses. The man in the road was undoubtedly some friend of hers, possibly her fiancé, and no doubt